So the topic is Freud, and the notion is that rationality is repression. And I won't say too much about that here because that's being talked about in the reading that you're going to do. But from Rivkin and Ryan, what I want you to notice is that I'll just say just a tiny little bit about it, to say that what we think of is rational is really, for Freud, the energy of the drives within us. And what we do rationally is we try to repress those drives, which are altogether too nasty for us to think about in our waking hours, having to do mostly with sex and violence, the death drive, and the libidinal drive. So rationality is our effort to present a calm and socially acceptable face to ourselves and to others. And it's just a cover-up for Freud, particularly if you read Freud in an aggressive and an extreme sort of way. It's just a cover-up. That's one thing I don't want you to be thinking of this week. Another thing is you look into the Rivkin and Ryan reading is right at the start, it mentions this term, the cogito. And the cogito is a term that is associated with a 17th century thinker, René Descartes. And the cogito is the notion of the self. And one of the things that René Descartes does is he's trying to figure out a way to put reason on a stable footing, because in his time period there are all kinds of religious wars and there's political upheaval, there's a lot going on, and he's looking for a way to move beyond that. And he says, I think, therefore I am. So he imagines the self as a stable point of reference. And this is going to create all kinds of problems. And part of what Freud is doing is he is coming back to this idea. He's showing that it is problematic. So notice the term cogito. And notice, too, the fact that implicitly and explicitly there's reference made to Descartes and to the 17th century. So now our timeline is getting a little longer. And now we're going beyond the 1960s and 70s, and we're going further back in time. Sometimes you will hear me use the word modernity. Sometimes I will talk about the modern. Certainly you should be familiar with the term postmodern. Well, what does postmodern mean? What is it post of? So modern can have a number of different meanings. It can mean simply it's modern, it's up to date. But in a timeline sense, in a more technical sense, modernity refers to a period that begins roughly in the 17th century. And René Descartes' notion of the self is part of the start of modernity. There's another term that's relevant here too, and that is the term enlightenment. And we'll get these sorted out, we'll put these on our timeline. But I want you to be thinking in terms of a timeline now that takes you back to the 17th century. Okay, still sticking with the Rivkin and Ryan introduction, which is very good, which is very useful and worth reading very carefully. One of the key ideas there is the notion of dreams. If we have this seething undercurrent within us of a sex drive and a death drive that we repress, how does it come out? Well, for Freud, in a key way, it comes out through our dreams. And what happens in our dreams is that which is within us can't be as well repressed because we're asleep. So our rational mind is less active. Now, it's not completely inactive, so it's not as if anything goes. What happens in dreams is still kind of misshapen and deformed, but there's more evidence in our dreams of some of this nastiness within us. So Freud has this phrase that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. It is the main road, the main way in. Through dreams, we can see that there is other shit within us. So dreams are very important. And to get your thoughts straight about the dream as this tapping into the unconscious leads you to better be able to understand what's going on with these other terms, namely the neuroses and the fetishes that we have. The logic is the same. Something else to notice about Freud that Rifkin and Ryan draw attention to, that Freud, the way he does his psychoanalysis is through stories. He reads stories. That's how he comes up with some of his psychoanalytical theories. So psychoanalysis and literary criticism have been hand in hand from the get-go. Jentsch turns the notion of the uncanny into a rational construal. For Jentsch, the fact that we don't know something is what makes us anxious and produces problems. So the idea of knowing something or not knowing something is the most important thing. But Freud is not on that page. Freud doesn't agree with that. Freud says, and there's a really interesting part on page 424 in particular, where Freud is talking about the Sandman story, and he simply says, look, this is about the eyes, and the eyes are a stand-in for testicles, and the kid is worried that he's going to lose his manhood, and that's what he's really anxious about. So it doesn't have anything to do for Freud, at least not directly, with the mind. It has to do with a fear of castration. Now, agree with him or not, what I want you to notice is how different this is from what Jentsch was doing, how it involves a creative and imaginative leap. It's beyond reason. Freud is putting the conversation somewhere else. And that is part of the way his psychoanalysis works and part of the way it has to be entered into through the imagination. Another part of Freud's essay that I think is totally fascinating is the notion of the logic of the double. And here Freud refers to another contemporary named Otto Rank, with whom he does agree. And what Otto Rank does is he talks about how when you're a child, you have a fear of death and you create a double figure as a way of preserving yourself against death. You think that, well, I'll have this other dimension of myself or this other version of myself, like an avatar, that will survive even if I should be harmed or killed. Now this is something that happens in childhood. This is a childish way of thinking. It's something we all go through, and it's how a double is created within us. Well, then later, once we realize, well, that was silly, that doesn't work, the double within us as an idea doesn't go away. And so then when we encounter doubles, or we think about doubles, or we think of ourselves in this twofold sort of way, now that process that we undertook as a way of fending off death, now it becomes a reminder to us that we are aware that we are going to die. So the double becomes a harbinger of death. It's such a beautiful, perverse, weird kind of idea. I love the logic of it. So I encourage you to spend some time thinking about that paragraph on page 425. And then the story that I'm asking you to find online this week is by William Carlos Williams, and it's called The Use of Force, readily available online. And it's just absolutely fascinating. And I think William Carlos Williams is actually explicitly reading psychoanalysis and writing a story based on psychoanalysis. I want you to notice the little girl. I want you to notice the way in which the doctor refers to her with animal imagery. Just notice that, so that that the girl is associated with nature, and particularly with unbridled nature, with nature that is untamed, that is feral. F-E-R-A-L is a word that is not used in the story, but that refers to this sort of animality. And then on the other side, you have the doctor. You have signs of his rationality, and he is a person of high social standing, someone who's respected, carries himself in a certain way. But in his encounter with this young girl, he finds himself losing his bearings, and certain things happen. And although the story is told in a very superficial level, you think, my goodness, there's a lot going on in this story. And I think it's really fun to read. It's really easy to talk about using Freudian psychoanalytical language. And I encourage you to think of it in those terms. All right. That's all that I've got to say. I'm going to leave you to it. I hope that you have a great week.